I've always been people view me as a Zac Taylor apologist. I still think Zac Taylor is a good coach, and I think that he's the right person to lead this team. But, I'm going to be honest here on today's show. Looks bad for Zac Taylor right now when you watch the Minnesota game back. Even worse than when you watch it live. And obviously, that was horrible there as well. One thing that Zac Taylor could always hang his hat on throughout his time here in Cincinnati is his teams never quit on him, right? Regardless of the spot they were in, they would continue to fight till the end and continue to respond, even if they had dropped a couple of games in a row or even if they were facing a big deficit. You never saw them quit. Over the first time in the Zac Taylor era, I saw them quit on the road against the Minnesota Vikings. He took the podium yesterday, and one of the things that stood out to me is he said he liked the way that they responded in the second half. And that really had me scratching my head because I don't know what he saw in the second half, but I certainly did not see it. The first two plays were runs, right? They get stuffed on the first play, and then it's a second and long run. And when you're getting blown out like that, I hate second and long runs to begin with, right? To be honest with you, if it's second, especially with this offense where they're at, you got to throw the football on second and long to put yourself in a situation where it's third manageable, right? They didn't do that for Jake Browning at all. It was all third and long all day. If you run the ball on second and long and you can't run the football, next thing you know, it's 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11, and against that Brian Flores defense with a backup quarterback and a suspect at best offensive line, you're flat out cooked. And that's just the reality of the situation. So they go 3 and out and they punt, and then the defense goes out there, gives up 10 plays and another touchdown. All right, so I didn't see them respond whatsoever. So I think that was just flat out false from Zac Taylor when he said, we really went out there and responded well in the second half. I remember during the game when he was talking to Tracy Wolfson going into half, said, we still have a lot of pride. We still have a lot to play for. We got to get things cleaned up. And then after the game, he was like, I'm happy with what we did after half. I don't see how you could possibly be happy with what Cincinnati did there in that spot. And another thing that stood out to me is this. And it was watching the Detroit-Baltimore game last night. And we've always talked about, even with Joe Burrow as the quarterback, why things always look so hard for Cincinnati offensively. So reliant on Joe Burrow making an incredible play and overcoming, right? Even the throws. There's never anything easy. It's always it's closely contested catches or, just having to fight through and get extra yards. You just don't see things come easy for this offense, even when things are clicking and they're playing well. It's all reliant on Joe Burrow being absurdly good at playing quarterback and rising above all the turmoil that, seemingly this team puts him in. If you watched the Detroit-Baltimore game last night, how about when they go for it, Detroit, on the goal line there of Baltimore, if you watch the game where basically they handed it off to Amon-Ra St. Brown in the backfield, and then they had kind of an option play there with Gibbs coming out of the backfield with him, and they pitched it to him, easy walk-in touchdown, just brilliance. And it reminded me of a Ben Johnson play, really. He was obviously known for kind of that gadgety stuff when he was calling the plays for Detroit. He obviously is gone, new offense coordinator for the Lions, but that felt like a Ben Johnson play where it's just great creativity and great scheme from an offense. When have we seen Zac Taylor do something like that? Never, right? They're not running the football, right? We all get that. It's not working, but what are they doing? They're just continuing to do the same stuff. Yeah, we'll get under center, we'll turn around, we'll hand the football off, or maybe we'll toss it to them, right? But there's nothing creative with their offense. You got to try to do some creative stuff when things aren't working for you. You have to switch some things up. There was a poll a couple of weeks ago where people around the league, coaches, executives were polled who are the best play callers in the National Football League, the top 3 guys. And nobody voted for Zac Taylor. Zac Taylor didn't get a single vote. Obviously, the guys at the top of the list are, McVay and Andy Reid and Ben Johnson, guys like that. And I'm not saying Zac Taylor needs to be in that kind of category. He doesn't need to be at that great level of play caller, but he's got to be better. And I hate when people sit there and just non-football people like me that just sit there and talk about it and just bang on the play calling. That's usually a pet peeve of mine because these coaches, they know a lot more than we do. But from the lack of creativity in the run game where it's okay, you're not generating any holes up front, but you're just going to continue to turn around and hand the football off and hope something changes, Like, no, there's got to be something that you shift with your offensive philosophy if you want to be able to overcome those things and eventually have more success in the run game. I get it. It's only week 3, but beyond that first half in Cleveland, it has been dreadful. That's a whole second half of football against the Cleveland Browns. That's a whole 60 minutes of football against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and then a whole 30 minutes there against Minnesota at half. You have to show something different. You got to be like, all right, there's something that we're going to spice up to try to have some success here on the ground. And it was the same old, and they had no success. So I need to see more creativity out of Zac Taylor. He has to be able to overcome too, right? He doesn't have Joe Burrow out there anymore. He has to show some of his brilliance, right? Lots of people would say, oh, he doesn't have any. I disagree. I think there's some in there that he can really be somebody that can help elevate this team from a play-calling perspective. But it can't just be, oh, we got to, find a way for these same guys to create holes for us in the run game. They're clearly not doing that. That's not going to change. All right, there's nothing that Scott Peters can do that can change that drastically where you're going to have success running the football with the 5 offensive linemen that you have right there. And if you go with Jalen Rivers again over Dalton Reisner, that's not going to have major effects there as well, because that's what you had in the second half against Minnesota, and clearly that didn't work either. All right, you need some brilliance from your play caller and your head coach to create some creative things. Scheme it up. Find ways to get guys in space, get guys open. We never see that with the Cincinnati Bengals offense in the run game or the passing game. It always looks so hard. How often when you watch Green Bay, they got guys running free? Maybe that's a bad example because what transpired in Cleveland, but typically LaFleur's got guys free all over the football field, and it's easy stuff for the quarterback, right? Creative stuff in the run game. The Dolphins have been a disaster, but McDaniel, over the past couple of years, maybe not this year, they've had great success on the ground with guys like Raheem Mostert, right? Maybe we need to see more motions, right, for the Cincinnati Bengals and not just, oh, we're going to turn around and hand you the ball and hope you can find some space to maneuver. Another takeaway that I got from the game watching it back was just how unprepared this team was to go in there and play Minnesota, right? And that's a direct reflection on the head coach when you come in and you are unprepared. It looked like Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores knew exactly what Cincinnati was going to do, right? If Cincinnati was going to run something, Minnesota knew what they were going to do, and then if Cincinnati was going to check out of that, Minnesota had the answers for that as well. Now, there's not many people in the National Football League, not many staffs in the league, besides maybe what they got in Kansas City, that's going to come into Minneapolis and outcoach Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores. Those two guys are at the top of their game. They're really, really good. All right, but it shouldn't have been that drastic of a coaching mismatch in this game between the Minnesota Vikings and the Cincinnati Bengals. And that's exactly what it was. It was very evident that it was a coaching mismatch in this game. All right, when you get blown out like that, again, I'm the biggest Zac Taylor guy you'll find online. But when you get blown out like that, that is a direct reflection of your head coach and not having them prepared. Clearly, the things that Minnesota was doing defensively, the exotic pressures, they weren't ready for it. And also something that shows me that they weren't prepared is this. Carson Wentz, you can say what you want about Carson Wentz's career to this point. Obviously, had a good couple of years in Philadelphia, had that MVP-like season there. They win the Super Bowl with Nick Foles. A lot of credit there goes to Carson Wentz for that. He's been a journeyman since then. Chiefs last year, Commanders at one point. He's bounced around a lot. One thing Carson Wentz does really, really well is he gets rid of the football quickly. And something that Cincinnati should have done in this game was find ways to make him hold on to the football and try to take shots down the football field. Even with one of the best receivers in the National Football League in Justin Jefferson, Carson Wentz, a backup quarterback, has struggled pushing the ball down the football field a lot throughout his career. They should have made them beat the Bengals defense deep and trusted their cornerbacks. Now, those cornerbacks, they've given you reason not to be trusted, but if you're going to give Wentz an opportunity to get rid of the ball quickly, and they did, he's going to pick you apart. And that's kind of what he did. Was Wentz sensational in this game? No, but he took what the defense gave him, and for the most part, he got the ball out of his hands quickly. And when he didn't, you sacked him, right? But there was too many easy completions. Should have forced him to push the ball down the football field more. Again, shows me they weren't prepared. They were less prepared than the Minnesota Vikings were, and ultimately that is what resulted in this game being so ugly for Cincinnati. So Zac Taylor's got to respond in a big way for the Bengals on Monday night. We're going to find out a lot about Zac Taylor and his control of this team on Monday night, because I've said multiple times, especially after another Joe Burrow injury. Zac Taylor's safe. And I still think that. But there's only one thing that can make him not safe, and it's that his team quits on him again. All right, and you would hope that they would never quit on him again, because you would hope that they're never in a spot where they're getting blown out as bad as they were in Minneapolis. But that can't happen. If the effort for professional athletes that are getting paid millions of dollars is something that becomes a question, that's a real issue. Still think Zac Taylor is going to be just fine. Still think this Bengals team is going to find a way to win some games this year. Is it going to be the playoffs? I don't know. Unlikely at this point. All right? But he's got to find a way to make sure his team is competitive throughout the entirety of a football game and doesn't quit regardless of the score. Didn't have that. Again, he's been able to hang his hat on that his whole career. Right? This isn't something like, oh, with a Zac Taylor team, they'll quit on him. Right? If that were the case, he'd be gone. It's not the case. This is the first time he's been here since 2019. They were awful that first year with Andy Dalton. What? They won 1 or 2 games that year. They didn't quit on him all year. They kept playing. They kept fighting. That showed me a lot. And ever since that moment in 2019, they've continued to do that. But for the first time ever, I look at that team and I say they quit. They quit on their head coach. And on top of that, their head coach didn't have them in a spot where they were prepared to go win the game. Now, Zac Taylor shouldered a lot of this blame. Zac Taylor's a man, right? He would never, he's like, bring it on. I get it. It's on me. And he has the right approach there in that regard. And I respect the hell out of Zac Taylor for doing that. But he's got to be in a spot with his team where they don't do that again. And we'll see. Tough opponent. On Monday, Denver Broncos, tough opponent. Monday Night Football, prime time, lights are on, island game, right? That's always dangerous for a head coach, right, that has some noise around him. You put him on an island with no other games going on Monday night, could be subject to a lot of criticism. We'll see how this team responds against Denver. Typically, teams in the NFL, after they get blown out, they respond, they compete hard the next week. And they should. And there's also reason to be positive because, as Trace alluded to on Off the Bench, you are what your record is. And we said that last year when the Bengals were like, it feels like they're a lot better. They're great offensively, but their record stinks. Well, this year, it feels like they stink, but they have a 2-1 record. And, oh, by the way, Baltimore, we'll talk about them later in the show, is 1-2. They're great offensively. I still think they'll be fine. Lamar Jackson's brilliant, but they're giving up points. Derrick Henry's turning the football over. Who would have thought that how the Bengals have played through 3 weeks, they're in a better spot than Baltimore? I get it. Baltimore's had a gauntlet basically to this point. Yeah, they played Cleveland last week, but having to play Buffalo, having to play Detroit, and they got Kansas City next week. That's difficult for the Baltimore Ravens. But still, you're tied atop the division. It could be a heck of a lot worse. And because of that, I think you're going to see the team respond well. I think they understand that the whole season for them is very much in front of them at this point. By no means a lost cause at this point for the Cincinnati Bengals.